Welcome to the Women's Issues Forum. This is the fifth and final installment in a series of forums that focus on women's empowerment. Our voices will be heard. Today we will talk about women in the face of domestic abuse and sexual violence. I'm Mary Lynn Parker. This program is a community outreach project of the Manatee County branch of the American Association of University Women and METV. Our purpose today is to learn the prevalence of domestic abuse and sexual violence in Manatee County, what can be done to break the cycle of violence, become aware of resources that are available, and what's being done to hold perpetrators accountable. Nationally, we are aware that on the average, 3 women are killed by current or former intimate partners each day. In the United States, a woman is battered every 15 seconds. During adulthood, nearly 1 in 4 women are beaten or raped by a partner. With me today are 5 community members who can provide advice, resources, and information to help women and men empower themselves in regard to domestic abuse and sexual violence. Please join me in welcoming our panel members. Connie Shingledecker from the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, Laurel Lynch, CEO of Hope Family Services, Catherine Wilson, Assistant Director of Manatee Glens, Heather Doyle, Assistant State Attorney of Manatee County, and Ken Followell, President of the Survivor Support Group, MaleSurvivor.org. To begin, I'd like to ask each of you to tell us a little about yourselves and your agency, and briefly describe ways that you help women empower themselves regarding domestic abuse, and include, of course, your work with the male victim as well. Heather, would you start?
I sure would. Like Mary Lynn said, my name is Heather Doyle. I'm a prosecutor in Manatee County. I've been a prosecutor for just about 12 years now. I work at the Manatee County State Attorney's Office, which is in our 12th Judicial Circuit. Our state attorney is Earl Moreland. I've worked for Mr. Moreland for nearly 12 years now. My current job is to supervise many of the prosecutors that do prosecute domestic violence and sexually violent cases. And our office, the Office of State Attorney, is in charge of prosecuting all crimes in Manatee County. So really what we do is we take cases that law enforcement brings us. A lot of those cases are family violence or sexual violence cases, and we prosecute those cases to conclusion.
Great, thank you for that introduction. Laurel, tell us about your work.
Hi, Mary Lynn, thank you. I work for Hope Family Services, and we're Manatee County's domestic violence service provider. So under the aegis of Domestic Violence Services, we have a host of things we do. What most people know us for is our shelter. We have a shelter in an undisclosed location that's available 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year. And that's really when someone's home is not safe, or a perpetrator is at large, law enforcement's trying to find that person, and they need a safe sanctuary. That's us. It's secure. We have cameras we know when people are on our property, those kinds of things. So that's really what we're most known for. But in addition to that, we have counseling, master's level counselors who work with survivors of domestic violence, both adult and children, advocates. Advocates are the front line, sort of basic in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the folks who help with food and safety, water, clothing, shelter, basic stuff. We have our children's program. We have a comprehensive children's program where we really work, I think, tirelessly with children to see if we can interrupt this intergenerational nature of domestic violence. In a perfect world, we'd like to see an end. I think we would all agree we would like to see an end. And so maybe we need to be focusing on children to teach them some nonviolent ways of dealing with the stress and the things that are happening in their lives. So when they get older, they won't repeat what they've seen so clearly and vividly as children.
Great, thank you. And Ken, tell us about your work.
Okay, I'm a survivor of sexual assault. When I was a child, from about 2 years old till about 14, I was sexually abused, and it was something that I had blocked from my memory. When I got to be 39 years old, I started getting memories back of it. And at that point, I found the organization I'm now president of, Male Survivor. And with their help and the help of my wife and some great therapists locally, I was able to put my life back together because it sort of fell apart at that time. And what Male Survivor does is we support men who have been sexually abused at some time in their life. Like myself as a child, men have been sexually assaulted as adults. So it totally runs the gamut. And unfortunately, so often people always see men as a perpetrator. They say the victim she, the perpetrator he. And what we do is provide support for the men who are victimized, both by men and women. So it's really about showing that sexual assault and domestic violence are genderless. They affect both genders, and we provide support for the men that too often are overlooked locally.
And so when we're talking today in our program about women's empowerment, we're really talking about empowering men and women who are victims of these types of crimes.
And it's very important to look at women's empowerment because it's so needed, but we really need to look at victim empowerment to get to the point where you're no longer a victim, but as we call ourselves, survivors.
Great, great. And Kathy, you were responsible for having Ken come and join us today. Tell us a little bit about your organization.
Well, like you said, I work for Manatee Glens. Manatee Glens actually runs the Certified Rape Crisis Program in Manatee County. We provide advocacy and therapy services for both children and adults, men, women, boys, girls, anyone who has been a victim in the past or currently has a crime happen to them. We will come to their aid and rescue 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have a hotline that we man. We are there at the point of when the crime actually happened to all the way through when the prosecution takes place, if that happens, and then afterwards for support, later therapy, whatever they might need. So we're there from the beginning to the end with either advocacy or counseling services.
Great. And Major Shingledecker, from your point of view, what is your interaction with victims of these crimes?
Well, it's really quite varied, although I work for the Manatee County Sheriff's Office and have for almost 35 years now. I'm in charge of Crimes Against Children, the Child Protective Investigation area, which also has our child protective investigators that used to work for Department of Children and Families. So we're also dealing with the dependency piece on these types of cases, as well as the criminal. So I'm in charge of criminal investigations and narcotics and vice. So I'm overseeing the detectives that are involved in the follow-up investigations on these, and certainly the Sheriff's Office, patrol officers will be the initial responding officers to these incidences when they are first reported, and any follow-up that would need to be done. For example, you heard someone mention when the person isn't able to be located and they're at large, the detectives will get involved and issue warrants or continue searching for the individual. And we have that dependency piece where we handle the incidences that happen to these children, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, or that they've witnessed domestic violence, and that is one of the most frequent types of cases that our child protective investigators are involved in, substance abuse and domestic violence, and oftentimes they go hand in hand. So those crimes are quite prevalent. We'll talk more about the statistics on that later.
Right, and I'd be interested too, as Ken tells us more about his story, how your agency would be interacting with someone who might have had the same experience that he has had. In terms of prevalence, how prevalent are these types of crimes in Manatee County? I'm wondering, is every crime reported? Does every crime get a day in court? Just from each of your points of view, how prevalent do you believe or do you know that these sexual assault and domestic violence crimes are committed?
Well, I'll start from the law enforcement perspective, and I do have some statistics or some actual numbers, countywide numbers from 2010 and 2009. And I'm happy to say that domestic violence incidences have, over those 2-year period, have decreased. In 2009, in the county itself, and there are 6 law enforcement agencies within the county, so this covers all of them, there were 3,115 calls or cases that were investigated by law enforcement in Manatee County, and in 2010 there were 2,900. So you can see that the types of calls, and they're varied, they can be homicides, they can be manslaughter, they can be forcible sexual assault, aggravated battery, stalking, aggravated stalking, simple threats and intimidation. So they run the gamut of from the very worst to the very least, but they're very, very common type calls that law enforcement is responding to.
And just to kind of play off what the major was saying, before I became a prosecutor, I think I was very I did not know the prevalence of family violence and sexual violence in the world that I lived in the home that I lived in. And then I took this job, and I did nothing but domestic violence cases when I was a young prosecutor. And I can tell you that I was absolutely shocked what is going on in some homes, these homes with children, with women and men together, with these intimate relationships. And I was mostly shocked by the fact that many of these women and men, these victims, I'd ask them, well, has this happened before? And in almost none of those cases was this the first report, was this the first time that an incident of violence or sexual abuse had occurred. And we get many cases where the report may be delayed in our sexual violence cases. So I think that the prevalence of violence is both from the perspective of law enforcement, it being reported to law enforcement, and then from the perspective of, you know, what is really going on in that home that is unreported. I'm sure Laurel has some comments on that as well.
It's our experience that oftentimes when someone is a new victim, for lack of a better way to phrase it, maybe a new couple, and there's some incident, it's not unusual for them to call law enforcement for help. But depending on how that experience goes, which is beyond law enforcement's direct control, state attorneys, I mean, one of the things we're going to talk about is how complex this system is to navigate for somebody. They don't generally continue to call. If it's not been a successful resolution, each time it becomes more and more difficult for that person to step forward and put themselves literally in the line of fire with their partner, because they've reached out for help. So, you know, statistics, I remember a professor a long time ago in college saying to me, statistics lie. And there is some truth to that, because you can do anything you want with them. A lot of the folks who come to us don't call law enforcement anymore. They're terrified of the Child Protective Services, because the batterer has said things like, if you call the cops on me, I'm reporting you for being a bad mom. I'm going to tell them that you do, and a litany of accusations comes out, which may or may not be true. And so they're loath to involve the system, because the system is not perceived as going to really make a difference in their lives. Staying is a safety plan. Putting up with abuse, while we may scratch our heads and wonder why, for many folks, that's a safety plan for them. It keeps them alive longer. Last year, I can tell you at Hope, last fiscal year, we operate not on a calendar year, but a fiscal year, and we're about 3/4 of the way through this year. But last year, we had 2,100 and change, unduplicated, face-to-face people come through the door and visit with us. And so I dare say that the problem is much larger than the statistics that we have or the statistics the major has, because I know that only about 25% of our clients, sometimes we do it quarterly, sometimes as high as 28%, but it's pretty consistent in that range, have called law enforcement for the incident.
So less than a third
That's
consistently.
Right. We say about a quarter, just as a general guide. Each quarter, about a quarter of the people come through our door for that incident. Doesn't mean they haven't called in the past, but we're focused on what's going on now, today. How safe are you now? And those people have only about, a quarter of them have called law enforcement for that incident. So we're talking about different populations than those who call and those who, 3/4 of them anyway, than those who don't. So
What about from the Rape Crisis Center, Kathy? What kind of stats are you?
Well, I looked at my last year's stats, and last year we served or gave about 4,000 services to victims, roughly between adults, children, and then adults molested as children, because there's different ways we break it out. We saw over 500 people unduplicated. We have it's the statistic that's held pretty closely over the years is about 60% of survivors or victims of sexual assault do not report. So there's a majority out there that aren't reporting, and we probably will get to some of this, and some of what Laurel said does hold true with sexual abuse as well. In sexual abuse, there's a shame factor, a guilt factor that is in play because, you know, as a society, we want to always reach out and in order to defend ourselves against these type of crimes, we often want to find out what was wrong with the victim. What did they do to have this happen to them? And that's a defense mechanism that we use to keep us safe, to feel safe. Well, we would never do that. We would never go there. We would never wear that. The typical things you hear. But I think that those things shatter when you look at the children that we're serving and the number of children that are sexually abused, because obviously not many people out there in their right minds are going to blame a child. So I think that those kind of things start shattering the beliefs, and that's what we need. We need that to break down and not blame victims any longer, so they can step out of that shame and guilt and those feelings and get the help they need from the great services that we do have in this county for both domestic violence and sexual violence.
Well, my mental math isn't really good, but when I'm hearing what Major says in relation to the numbers of cases that they answer and the numbers of cases that the state's attorney's office actually deal with, then we're looking at truly a funnel where there's a lot of it going on and keeps narrowing in terms of holding a perpetrator accountable in the final analysis.
From
Ken?
the sexual violence side, something that'll give a good visual is 1 in 4 girls before they're 18. Every 4th girl, female you see, will be sexually assaulted. 1 in 6 boys before they're 18 will be sexually assaulted. I mean, any little league team you look at, you're going to have 1 or 2 people on that that've been sexually assaulted. Any elementary school class, you know, if you've got 20 kids in there, you're looking at 3 or 4 of them are going to be sexually assaulted before they graduate from high school. Any gathering of kids in your neighborhood, you know, so when you hear, you know, 5,500, all these things, those are always other people. But when you look at the 1 in 6 and the 1 in 4, and that's not 1 in 6 of groups you don't belong to. It cuts across every race, every socioeconomic class, every religious background. You'll find it everywhere. So, you know, we have this idea that because I'm this, I'm safe. And, you know, it's just not true. Those numbers test out over and over again.
Major?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of comment, especially involving the sexual assault, because you really have several different types of situations occurring. You know, you have the child that may be sexually abused within the home setting, which, you know, gets us right back to the heart of talking about the domestic related incident. And then you can have someone that the child knows, trusts, and loves, which can be a coach, it can be a teacher, it can be someone from the church, it can be a number of individuals that have contact and interact with this child that no one would ever believe are going to do something like this. But when we go back to the child that has this occur almost on a daily basis because they live, it's happening in their household. I think that the cases that I've worked, whether they're male or female victims, the tragedy here is that these children are not supported within that family structure in any means that they would be if they were sexually abused or battered by a stranger. When you think about the child that was walking home from school and was nearly abducted, and we captured a portion of it on video as this attacker was attacking, you know, the entire community came out and was supportive, and we need to get that person, we need to put that person in jail, it's a terrible person, and they could all certainly feel like that could have been my child. But the child where it's happening in their own home, and we identify that, and then we maybe make an arrest, they may not even be supported by that family unit any longer. That mother or relative that they're living with feels like now the breadwinner is out of the home. Who's, you know, how are we going to pay for our house payment? How are we going to pay for our bills? How are we going to put food on the table? And then this child is no longer supported. And I think that when you look at those issues, it makes it a lot more difficult for these cases to come forward, because the child is not supported and may have been trying to tell, and that was suppressed for years. So when we look at it, I think you really need to understand the dynamics behind it when it becomes a domestic-related incident versus someone outside of the home setting where the child may get more support.
Right, and I think our children are always, you know, the stranger danger type of thing is really drilled into them.
And by far and large, that is the least. The most likely scenario is going to be someone that the child knows, trusts, and loves, and it will be the very least incident will be the stranger. Very, very rare. And those get a lot of attention because everyone is so fearful of that, but that is actually the least of the types of cases that we see in sexual assault.
And I totally agree with that, and I agree with the major. The cases that I saw when I was prosecuting the sex crimes against children caseload, the specialized unit that we have, were by and large, it was family members, it was a position of trust in the household, and I would just want to add to that there also was kind of, when the disclosure occurred, we also saw a lot of family factions, where part of the family, you know, believed the child, the other part of the family was confused or may have been in denial. And that denial can be a very, very strong thing. And so when we work these cases with law enforcement, I think that communication is so important to kind of know, hey, where is everyone in this, so that we can help protect that child, protect our case, make sure that we're doing what we need to do, which that dynamic, you know, can be particularly difficult for us.
Laurel, do mothers bring their abused children to Hope as well to keep them safe?
They do. Nationally, the statistic is that 60% of the folks who are abusive to their intimate partner are also abusive to their child.
Wow.
And sometimes folks come to us in a sort of roundabout way. Law enforcement's involved because somebody finds out, a teacher or somebody in the periphery of this family finds out that a child is abused. So there's a little bit more investigating. They find out, well, so is mom. And so through intervention with the Sheriff's Department and their CPI unit, and we have a domestic violence advocate co-located there with the Sheriff's Department in that unit, when they identify domestic violence, we're part and parcel of that whole family's case plan and information, because sometimes folks don't put that together. Conversely, the two greatest reasons that somebody catapults themselves through the doors of Hope Family Services, one is that they found out he's cheating on her. You can beat me up, you can do all these things, and now you're fooling around. That really makes folks cross. But the other one, and the number one reason people come to us, is they're afraid for themselves, but they figure they can handle it, but now he's hurting the kids. And they make that connection. There is a lot of denial, as everybody's been talking about. There's an awful lot of denial. But when the denial seems to dissipate, suddenly there's this click, and they get it. And oh boy, this is happening to my son or daughter too. Boom, out the door. And they catapult themselves to us, because there's a line in the sand. I believe, I don't know that everybody on the panel would agree, that most of the mothers, certainly not all, but the vast majority of the people we deal with who have children, because remember, some people are abused who don't have kids, but the folks that we deal with who have children really do want to be a good parent and try to be a good parent. And so they see that them being the brunt of the violence may somehow mitigate the violence towards the child. So in a sort of roundabout way, it's almost a safety plan in their mind that they're protecting Junior. And so when that is shattered, we see them really march forward to get help.
And Mary Lynn, I'd just like to comment on that. The child protective specialists or child protective investigators that go out and get involved, we actually take it to, we actually will force the issue. In many instances where the mother, oftentimes, you know, for the most part it is the women, when they're being abused, and the child may not be, but they're watching this, that's a mandatory call to the hotline. So when we have law enforcement officers out conducting an investigation, finding out that domestic violence did occur, and that it did occur in the household where these children could have been eyewitnesses or ear witnesses, as Heather would like to describe them to be, where they could have heard it or seen it, that's going to be a call to the hotline, because that's our opportunity to break the cycle. And I think it's making a difference, because when our child protective investigators get involved, and sometimes the mother is not ready to make that step, and we force the issue, because we know that she may not even be able to protect herself and may not be able to protect those children. And so we oftentimes will force the issue and getting a restraining order and having that person removed from the home setting so that those children are not going to be subject to seeing, hearing, and being victimized by it as well. So we sort of are, when we're aware of it, we are pushing that to a higher level. So I would say that there are many that do come to Hope Services when they have seen that their children are now in danger, but those that don't, sometimes we make that decision for them.
And then I think what will happen is when law enforcement does that, and they do that very well, that then that case comes to the prosecutor's office where I work, and we are able to see if we can piece together a case to be able to hold that batterer accountable. And that's what I think is so important for victims of domestic and sexual violence to know, particularly domestic violence in the way the laws work, which is that we do not burden the victims with the decision of whether or not to prosecute a case. And I think it's important for the public to know, and families to know that are watching this, that it is the state attorney's office's decision whether or not to go forward and file charges against a person. That we have many victims who may come in who are under the influence of trauma and will come in and will have opinions on whether or not charges should be filed. And while we appreciate that, we thank them for that input, we are going to decide whether or not a case can be made there. So that if a criminal charge is filed against a person, I'm here to tell you that it is not because the victim wanted charges filed or didn't want them filed. It is because our office felt there was sufficient evidence to proceed and go forward with that case. So circling back to the child example, that child, that poor child may have maybe a wealth of information to help us hold that batterer accountable, and that has made a difference in many, many, many of our cases.
If I may just add, well, I have the utmost respect for the major and the sheriff's office job that they do. We don't always agree on that forcing the issue. And I feel like it's really important that I'm an advocate for battered women first, foremost, and always, and males who are battered. But I'll tell you, we hardly have any guys calling us. We have a room, we built a new shelter, we have the services. I think the shame for men who are battered is far greater than for women, because there's been so much dialogue, but that's another, we can circle back to that.
Right.
We do get an awful lot of people who call and come in and they say, the sheriff's department said, if I don't get help, they're going to take my kids. Do you want help? Not particularly. Do you want us to intervene? Not particularly. Do you want to file an injunction for protection? Not particularly. And here's why, in my opinion, this becomes problematic. She's afraid of losing her kids, right? So she trots down to the courthouse, goes to the clerk's office, fills in an injunction for protection. The minute she gets before a judge and she says to the judge, I'm here because the Sheriff's Department investigators for the Child Abuse Division said I have to get this injunction, that's not grounds for a restraining order is what we're talking about. Injunction's the real name. And it's dismissed. Now, fast forward the clock 6 months, a year, whatever it is, she really needs help. they hold that against her. You had one back in 2008 and you didn't follow through, or the judge didn't grant it because of this scenario. She looks like a nitwit, that she can't make up her mind. When the reality was, as the major said, she's not ready. You want to keep those kids safe? That I agree with her. I think kids have to be protected, then protect mom. Now again, there are certainly some folks who need that sort of heavy-handed intervention, but certainly not the vast majority, because they want to do the right thing by their kids. Mm-hmm. And what Heather said, what I was thinking as I was sitting here is absolutely the same thing. Why aren't we holding the batterer accountable? I can't stop that batterer. Major Shingledecker, who has a gun, can't stop the batterer, but we look at that woman and say, if you let your children witness this or hear this domestic violence, we're going to hold you accountable for this other person's behavior. It makes no sense to me. It's the batterer who is perpetrating the bad behavior and needs to be held accountable. And that I think we all agree with.
And one more point on this and then we're going to move along.
Well, I just want to bring up that in the majority of those instances, the perpetrator is being arrested. So we are doing our job. We are arresting that individual. And then the follow-up piece is to make sure that the perpetrator doesn't end up back in that home setting, which oftentimes they do end up back in that home setting circumstance, and then the children are exposed all over again. And it's a requirement of the statute. We are mandatory reporters to the hotline. We don't have a choice in that matter. So I don't think it's really heavy-handed, so to speak. It is statutorily driven, and we are mandatory reporters. And if we didn't report, it would be a misdemeanor crime for us to fail to report that to the hotline. So following through with that, it is really, really important when these folks cannot protect themselves, that there is an entity that is willing to step up and protect those children at all costs.
Ken?
Yeah, the one thing, so often people outside of the situation, they look at it and just don't understand. Someone hits you, you say something. It seems so easy. But it's never just the sexual assault or the physical violence. Before it gets to that point, there is the emotional and the intellectual beating down to get to the person to the point where they feel like they're trapped. Before there's anything physical that happens, the person is totally subjugated to that perpetrator. And I think that's what's so misunderstood by the public a lot, because it seems real easy. Someone hits you, you talk about it. But before they ever hit you, they got you to the point where you can't say anything. And that's what's important to remember is, you know, these people were victims before there was ever the first instance of violence. Mm. And the entire family gets put down by whoever is in that position of power. They take total control.
From all of your comments, I think I certainly have a better idea of what the situation is and what the experience is of the victim. Let's talk a little bit about what's being done to break this cycle of violence. Kathy, can you describe some things that you know that are going on in your agency or in the community that can help us kind of break loose from some of the complexity of this to make it something we can truly address in our community in a positive way?
Yes, a lot of times with sexual violence and sexual assault, the more you talk about it, the more we are on shows like this, the more that people understand that this is a prevalence, it's happening in our society, the more people will go back and talk to their family members, to a trusted person they know, children here. We hope that every parent is out there and is educating their child on good touch, bad touch, strangers, and we talk about, we do make a lot in society about those type cases, even though there is more going on in the home. An uncle, a brother, a father, a stepfather, whoever it might be, a mother, it can be, victims can be both male and female, and obviously perpetrators can be both male and female. I think that the more we have things like, we had Lauren's Walk come through Manatee County, there was some press on that. It was a woman who was abused by her nanny for years, finally felt it was okay for her to tell and told, and now she walks from Key West to Tallahassee every year during the session so she can draw attention to sexual abuse. That's a great opportunity. We have Sexual Assault Awareness Day, Sexual Assault Awareness Month in April. that also helps. We also are part of any education in the school system and towards prevention. So we talk to, we're in a program right now, it talks about the different sections of bullying and different behaviors, but sexual violence and dating violence is one of those things. We have task force. We meet on a daily basis. We all communicate together about what we're doing, how to treat people, how cases are going. So I think that the more communication on our end, that is a type of prevention, educating, telling people that if this happens to you, it is okay for you to tell. And letting people know about boundaries and about what to expect from themselves and how to treat themselves. Education to parents about how to talk about body parts even to their children. I mean, we have nicknames for body parts, which is a no-no. You call a body part by the name because, when people are abused, they then will say what's happened to them, and we want to make sure that there's no discrepancy in what really happened. So there's a lot of different things that we do on a daily basis to educate and move towards prevention and with sexual abuse.
So education and heightened awareness. What
Yes.
other things are happening in our community to break the cycle of violence? Major?
Well, at the sheriff's office, and I'll talk mainly about the domestic violence aspect of this, if children are present and do witness it, because that's really where you can help break the cycle. When we make an arrest, we do communicate that information to the school where that child attends so that the counselor or the teacher are aware that this child witnessed domestic violence in their home setting and that a perpetrator would have been arrested. And that way, if the child comes to school and is sleeping in class, is acting out in some fashion, instead of being punished for that behavior, that teacher will now have an understanding that that child witnessed something and that person, was arrested during that night, and hopefully that child will then receive appropriate counseling there at the school immediately, if they, rather than being punished, sent to the office, time out, those things where if the child's acting out. And we certainly provide our reports to Hope Family Services in making sure that those services are then followed up, and the parent does have to agree to ongoing counseling services with these children. But we do want to make sure that the school is aware. So again, they're not punishing this child for a behavior that would be attributed to what they saw.
Any other ways that we're breaking this cycle of violence in our community?
Well, I think one of the most recent things that brought us all together is Project Safekeeping. We've worked tirelessly for the last year and a half, I believe, from the planning and implementation, and it involves all of us as partners to help educate the community. And also, we brought, in the very first forum, we brought together community stakeholders in all sorts of non-traditional ways to identify what the gaps are. What are we missing? What can we be doing better? In the second forum, you were kind enough to facilitate. Thank you very much, Dr. Parker. You did a great job. It was for law enforcement, and Heather was a presenter about what makes a good prosecutable case. Because we can all sit here and talk about, gee, if only we did this or that or the other thing. Well, I'm pretty impressed after doing this work for over 25 years. For the first time, we're sitting down and saying not only what can we do better, but okay, who's going to do it? How are we going to do it? And we're implementing a plan. And just coming up here very soon, we have a training for the judiciary, the judges. We want to hear from them as well as we want to present that information to them about how we need to be working together, because it really is a community issue. This isn't my issue. This isn't Heather's or yours or any of ours. This is our community issue. Because I could have the most fabulous family. My child's growing up sitting in that classroom with those children who witnessed domestic violence. And I certainly don't want my daughter dating that boy that's not had any intervention, or my son dating that girl that thinks that this behavior is A-okay. And so, while people sometimes think, and maybe I'm stretching here, but in my opinion, I think sometimes folks think that they're insulated from this. This has no impact on my life. Why would I care about domestic and sexual violence? Well, you live here. These folks are among us. you really need to care because it's the quality of life we have as a community that is at risk here. So, just to add, we also have a prevention program in the high school and the middle school, and we talk about, here's the laundry list of things you need to be looking for in someone you're dating that might clue you in that this is not a good candidate for your future.
When you think of sexual violence particularly, and many of us get our information from programs on television, I guess, so the whole trauma of reporting that you've been raped, let's say, what kind of things is the community doing that helps to make that less traumatic for the victim?
I could tell you a lot of what they do to make it more traumatic. Making it less traumatic would really, the more that we have people that understand that this does happen, that it isn't the fault of the victim, and that for them to even come forward is a huge feat for them, and to be welcoming of them telling their story and talking about it and treating them just like they would any other person and not looking down on them as, well, you could have done this, or why were you there, or vice versa. I think that is would be a big step in the right direction. I think that we still, like I said earlier, we still live in a very blaming society. We are subject to CSI and all these shows that, everything's wrapped up in an hour. They always get their man or woman, and it's just, it's very easy. And so, we do get victims that come to us and they don't understand why it's not being prosecuted. They did the right thing. They woke up and realized what happened to them. They went right away and reported. But yet they're being questioned on things that I wouldn't even want to say on the show. The questions sometimes that are asked, which has to happen, but at the same time, without an advocate or without someone there telling them, hey, this is okay. We're trying to help you. It's very hard for them to understand why they're being treated a certain way. So I think the more society starts really owning it as an issue that everyone could have, and that it could happen to you or someone you love if it hasn't already and you just don't know. I think as soon as that happens, it makes a big step forward for victims to come out and tell the truth and get the help they deserve, and to understand their rights as victims.
Well, Kathy hasn't mentioned one of the things that has really occurred recently, which I think is a big step in the right direction for less traumatization to these victims, and that's the sexual assault nursing center, and where these traditionally they would be taken, or they'd have to go to an emergency room and wait for inordinately long periods of time. And so why don't you describe a little bit about that?
We did open a sexual assault nurse examiner center on February 6th. It opened, and within the first week we had about 8 clients come through the door. And so when you're looking at 60% don't report, you can imagine the numbers. Right now we're working on getting nurses doing on-call shifts, so that's a little hard to do. But what it basically does is it gives a place for the victim to go that's not an ER, where they're not treated as a number, where obviously an ER is a place where emergencies need to be dealt with, so gunshot wounds, heart attacks, whatever it might be that's going on, which isn't going to be the priority as a rape. But a rape is a huge priority for that person that's going through that. The trauma that they've already ensued, it's there. So what we do is we meet them at this center where they are the person who is focused on. The law enforcement officer can come there, the detective can come there, the advocate is there. And so not only is the exam a shorter amount of time, but they're dealt with in a very confidential, caring manner. Their statements are taken. They are able to take a shower. They're able to get the clothes and all the necessary things they need to be able to take a step out into the world again and start their road to survivorship, which is really what we want. I mean, people are a victim, and victim is not a word we want to do away with and call everybody survivors, because they're not that yet. People need to own the fact that they're a victim, and then they need to move towards that survivorship. And to do that, they have to have the right services. So we're really excited about the SANE Center. We anticipate that the numbers that we will have more in numbers as far as people reporting. So I don't necessarily want to alert people that alarm them that we're going to have more rapes in this county. We might have more that actually are reported, which is a good thing because that helps not only law enforcement but our prosecutor's office, and it does hold those people accountable. The quicker they come to see us, and the quicker we can get to them.
And there's been a change in the victim's rights that allow a victim to come forward to receive examinations without moving forward through prosecution. So I think that in the past had been sort of a damper for those folks to even come forward, because if they didn't want to pursue criminal prosecution, they were more or less they were required to, by the way the victim advocate or the victim's rights were written, for them to get those type of exams. But now that's changed, so they can come, have the exam, and not even need to deal with law enforcement if they don't want to.
Right.
And what Manatee Glen's rape crisis does for us, for the state attorney's office, is they come in, they will sit with the victim at the interview, they will help us with coordination, they will help us with getting a child or an adult to pertinent court dates, but most importantly, they will give that victim the support that they so desperately need through our criminal justice system, which to any person who's been in a non-traumatic event is a very difficult system to navigate. So I think in the interviews that I've done with sexual assault victims, sexual battery victims, having rape crisis there is just golden, because okay, I can focus on what I need to do, I can get the information that I need, but I know that this woman or man, this advocate, has this victim's back for all of the support and their therapeutic needs, because that helps us in the long run be able to do what we need to do. And I really do see a big difference with that, and with victims kind of having an understanding and a roadmap for what lies ahead for them.
Right.
Right.
Talk to us a little bit, Ken, from your personal experience. What's helped you from all the resources that have been available?
From my experience, since I had denied that it happened for so long, when I came to recovery, it was really kind of difficult, because I had, first off, to deal with the fact that my life wasn't what I thought it was, and it was something else. And then the shame that I felt like I had been living a lie for a long time. So, I mean, that was difficult. One of the things that was really important with me was to find other people who had been through what I had been through, which is what made the website good for me. I'm an IT guy, I'm a geek. So I could go online anonymously and go to a chat room and find that there were other people like me. But one of the things that was very helpful was Manatee Glen's had a support group for men who were sexually abused. And to sit down in a room with other men that had been through it. And that was huge. It makes a very big difference if people who have been through this can find someone else that can sit there and nod their head yes, because they really know. They've been through it, and you're not saying things that are shocking or horrifying them. You're saying things that they're all too familiar with. So I mean, that makes a huge difference. And being part of Male Survivor, which we reach out all over North America and the world, but there are so many places that don't have the resources we have here. We have Hope Family Services, and we have Manatee Glen's, and we have Sheriff's Office and state's attorneys who really ask those questions of what's being done to take care of the victim. So these guys really can't toot their own horn too much, but we are so fortunate here that we have people who are concerned with it. That's not the case everywhere. So, having people who are willing to take the step to ask the questions and adjust their programs to fit what I needed when I needed it made a huge difference. And we've got that here. And, as you're dealing with people in your life, just being willing to listen and accept and not grill the person. Just to be able to sit there and listen and hold their hand, or possibly not hold their hand. Look at the body language and see if they just need you to be near but not too close. Mm-hmm. So I mean, those are the things, is don't necessarily presume but believe what you're being told. And that made a huge difference for me, is whenever I finally worked up the nerve to tell somebody, I was so lucky because everyone knew that I wasn't lying to them, and I was sure they thought I were going to accuse me of that, and to be believed. That makes the biggest difference in the world, because that's what when I was speaking earlier about being beaten down, that's what you're told. Mm-hmm. My perpetrator, when I was 2 years old, he started hammering it at my head, if you tell, no one's going to believe you. If you tell, no one's going to believe you. If you talk to victims, they've heard that. I guarantee they've heard that. And to tell and be believed is so important.
Yeah, I just wanted to, he really struck a note with me when he was talking about the counseling, and I just have to bring this issue up because we've seen it so often in the prosecutorial arena, where we find out about a case, we move forward, we do a really good job on that end, we may prosecute and get a fairly decent sentence on the person, and then this is a young child. Maybe it's a child that's prepubescent. And now the counseling may be there for a short while up until the trial, and then it drops off. And what I think is really so unfair to this child is when they really need it as they get older and they start to develop and mature and go through hormonal changes, and things now really start to impact them about the sexual abuse. They aren't getting the counseling that they need, and they really need it again. So I think that it's understanding that these children are going to go through different phases as they grow older and have different levels of understanding of what happened to them, and how incredibly important that counseling is. And so if there are parents out there that are listening who have young children, a lot of those parents want to forget about it. They want to just say, you know what, I just want to move on, you know, my kid's okay now, and I've done the right thing, bad person's in jail, and that kid really needs some counseling, because that kid's going to start acting out in a whole different arena, a different way, and what's happening is they need counseling again. And so I just really hope that for those folks that are watching, that they do understand the importance of getting that.
So it's not only life-changing, it's lifelong.
Yes.
And just to add to that, and hopefully they will know, or they'll know after the show, that the rape crisis services at Manatee Glens, the core services that we offer are advocacy, such as Heather described, but we have therapists there that are specialized in sexual abuse of children and adults. They can come anytime, it's no charge, and they can continue to come. We don't, our regular rules of how long we keep cases open and how many sessions you get, there's no rules with rape crisis. We've had children come and see a counselor and go through the trial system and graduate, so to speak, and then come back 2 years later and go through as they mature and grow. We know that adults are the same way. They can go through something and then they think they're fine, and 2 years later they have a flashback, they have a moment where it's just they're not feeling safe anymore, and they are allowed to come back at all. I mean, we never ever question that, and we want to make sure people know that services are not there just one time and you use it once. Just like with Hope, it's there forever. It's there for as long as they need it, or whenever they need it. 0 to 99 and plus.
It's so important that we come to understand that mental health is health. We don't send someone to the doctor when they're 5 to be checked out and say, okay, you're good. Never come back to a doctor again. Anything like this that happens in your life does have lifelong effects. And there are going to be things that come up. And that's not bad news. The really good thing about me remembering this is I actually got to address the fact that mental health was something that needed attention. And it's almost to the point where I feel sad for the people who are unaware of their mental health needs.
Exactly.
Because mental health is just health care.
Exactly.
And once we get to the point of that, it empowers all of us to take care of ourselves in a more effective manner.
Right, and each other.
Mm-hmm.
And recognize it in each other.
Well said.
Very, very well said. So one point you made, Major, when you said we let the school know, and I'm a retired educator, so I'm familiar with the school setting. How can we be certain that the school counselor is prepared to work with that child in the way that you assume they will be?
Well, and it's not so much that they're going to continue to work with that child or be prepared. I mean, they are a licensed counselor. They have to be in order to work in the school system. I'm hoping that I'm saying that correctly. But we do want them certainly to understand if the child is acting out, that the child, it's more important that they not be treated improperly. In other words, they're aware. And then I think it's more important then that the parent reach out to a counseling entity such as Hope Services that is geared directly towards dealing with domestic violence and that sort of circumstance. Because the school may not have that specialty, but at least they're not going to be, that child won't be punished, and that's the most important thing. And when teachers, especially of elementary school, when we went back and we talked with them and we said, and counselors, how do you feel about having this information versus when you didn't have it? And they said, you know, it has really been eye-opening. We knew something was wrong, but we just didn't know what it was.
Right.
And so we're so thankful to now at least have this information so that we can, it's more what they don't do than what they may sit and talk with the child, but what they wouldn't negatively do to the child.
Super.
And I think Laurel and I, both of our agencies are are in the school system a lot. We have a lot of connections, and so they do feel most principals, assistant principals on down the line, they feel very comfortable contacting either of our agencies to get more help or to extend the offer to us if they feel that they need support.
Right. Well, we're almost out of time. Are there any final comments from anyone on our panel? We definitely appreciate so much this stimulating and informative forum. While we were thinking about it being women's issues, we certainly have found today that it is a community's issue as we face domestic abuse and sexual violence. And certainly as a member of the community, I am so encouraged to learn that all that's available from each of your agencies, as well as the cooperation among your agencies to address these issues in Manatee County. On screen are emergency numbers to call to report incidents of domestic abuse and sexual violence. We would encourage our viewers to certainly take advantage of this. You can also email us at manateeaauw@hotmail.com for more information about this or any of our programs. Let us know your questions, concerns, and comments. On my behalf, I want to thank our guests, and I would like our guest as well as Wanda Wellbrock to be acknowledged as directing this program, and thank METV for their assistance in producing this special series, and also thank you for watching.